Tonight, the revolution will be televised with Beethoven's Third Symphony, the Eroica. Taverner's Requiem fragments will leave you broken, and there's beautiful tragedy to be had with Mahler. It is the bittersweet symphony that can only be Proms Extra. Hello and welcome to Proms Extra, the show that recalls some of the highlights of the Proms coverage from the Royal Albert Hall over the last week. Tonight in the studio, I'm joined by three classical stalwarts. There's Chord of the Week, and we spend the day with two very different composers. In a week that saw the sky lit up by a supermoon and a meteor shower, not wanting to be left out, the Proms joined in and showed that in the celestial Royal Albert Hall there was no shortage of stars. Just some of the highlights from the past week in the Royal Albert Hall. Now, who is in our studio in the Royal College of Music tonight? Well, first, we have a soprano who has sung for audiences all over the world and who was the muse of one of tonight's featured composers, the late Sir John Taverner. It's Patricia Rosario. Next to join Proms Extra is one of the UK's finest composers, celebrating his 80th birthday at the Proms this season. Back in the 60s, he was known as an enfant terrible, and we rather hope that nothing has changed since then. It is Sir Peter Maxwell Davies. And our final guest used to be a music teacher, then gave it all up when his singing career took off. Music education's loss is the operatic world's gain. He's performing at the last night of the Proms and is closing the show for us tonight. It is Roderick Williams, and welcome to all of you. And Sir Peter, or Max, may I call you Max?
Please.
That's what so many people know you as, I know. You're celebrating your birthday with the Proms this year. So much of your music has already been heard. I think we've had 3 Proms already this season. Do you still like listening to your music?
It was a very strange experience. In the first of these Proms, they did a piece that I wrote in 1962, and it was like seeing a ghost of yourself at a very young age. Quite frightening, but I thought, although I would have liked to have taken a big red pencil and crossed a lot of it out and done it better, I thought, well, I was quite a promising student.
But a birthday party to come as well, a special birthday prom on your 80th itself, I believe.
Yes, the 8th of September, the Scottish Chamber Orchestra are doing a late night prom for my birthday, and guess what they're finishing up with? The Orkney wedding.
Tremendous. Of course they are.
Yes.
Now, Patricia, you have been a feature of many, many Proms, but your very first one, your debut, was at the last night of the Proms in 1984,
That's right.
I believe.
Yes, yes.
What do you remember of that occasion?
I felt very, very privileged to be singing in the Serenade to Music by Vaughan Williams, and it just suited my voice perfectly. So it was a treat.
Well, I'm sure that, Roderick, you're going to have a treat as well this year at the last night of the Proms. How's the prep going?
Well, so far, I think, but I'm intrigued that you didn't say you were terrified. Were you terrified by it?
Well, I think once I get on stage, I really enjoy the occasion.
Yeah.
One's always terrified before,
I should
and
be
that's
taking
a good
notes. Yeah.
Yes, I think going out to conduct at the Albert Hall through that archway, it is so frightening, and you see all there's promise there and the keenness and the buzz, but of course as soon as you turn your back and you look at the orchestra, you forget about everything except just the music, and it takes over completely.
Well, even though I hope you won't be turning your back, you'll be concentrating on the music as well. And of course, you've got another prom before then as well.
That's right, just coming up, Butterworth I'm singing, the Shropshire Lad songs.
Beautiful.
So I'm really looking forward to that. It's an orchestration because I've sung them many times with piano, but this is a chance to take it to a slightly different colour.
Well, we're looking forward to that very much as well. But 3 weeks ago on Proms Extra, we discussed Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony. Tonight, it's all about his third, the Eroica. Shown on BBC4 last night, the Eroica was dedicated to Napoleon Bonaparte, whom Beethoven held in the highest regard for his anti-monarchist stance. Well, that dedication got scribbled out once Beethoven found out that Napoleon had declared himself emperor. And the moral of that story is, never compose for a revolutionary until you have seen them nail their colours to the mast. Well, conducted by Proms Extra family member Sir Mark Elder with the Halle Orchestra, here is Beethoven's Eroica. Beethoven's Third Symphony, the Eroica, and that was the 118th performance of the piece in 120 years of the Proms. And Max, you conducted one of those previous performances, haven't you?
It's a marvellous piece to conduct. What you might bear in mind is that you must respect that score, absolutely, but remember how original it is. For instance, that very first tune. The D flat, or is it a C sharp, intervenes in the line and opens up such possibilities of exploration through the development right through to the end of that first movement. And it makes you very aware that you have to make people understand how revolutionary and how utterly brilliant that D flat was in that very first tune.
Do you not feel sometimes it's music that requires you to listen in a way that classical music beforehand had somehow been allowed to wash over?
Yes, with Beethoven, there's no washing over, my goodness. Gosh, not at all.
Well, of course, until then, music had often been background music, hadn't it? It had been something to sort of, entertain gently. But this was making such a statement.
Oh, it made a statement which we've not got over yet.
I mean, Patricia, do you feel that sense of revolution when you hear it? Do you feel astounded still?
Absolutely. I think the orchestra is so grand and powerful, and there's so many different emotions coming through the music. But I also love the fact that he's strident, but he's also at times very tender and delicate. It's beautiful.
And what do you think it shows us about Beethoven the man when you hear a piece of music like this?
You get a huge amount of the man in his music, and I think that his reluctance to compromise comes over hugely, particularly in this symphony, over and above the two previous. The idea that he seems to be seizing the lapels of his collective audience and just shaking them and saying, listen. He's quite demanding. And so you get the feeling at the end of this, he may not be the most wonderful dinner guest. A bit of bludgeoning going on here.
Extremely sure of his own opinions and his own ability.
Yes.
Yeah. There is this sense, really, isn't there? This was sort of the first piece of music as political statement. Or is that what the importance we put on it now with hindsight?
It's very difficult with hindsight, isn't it? Because you mentioned so many performances here at the Proms alone.
Yes.
And so for all of us to imagine what it must have been like to hear that for the first time, I have in my mind's eye, as I say, classical symphony performances for the first time where everything would be very polite. The count or countess who would have paid for the evening, nobody would want to unsettle them. There's a feeling for Beethoven that this is his own piece. It reflects himself. It also reflects something that is common to humanity. So I think he would much rather have upset the dinner table for the Count. I would much rather have shouted and screamed and that this is what it is to be human. That's the impression I get off the music. Anyway.
Yes.
What kind of a human do you think he was, Patricia?
Oh, I'm sure he was a difficult man, but I think genius often has those extremes. Creative people do, don't they?
We all said, looking at Max.
I'm not a genius, but I am creative and I think I am difficult.
Well, more of that anon, but we're going to stick with that same prom because the Halle also performed Edward Elgar's Sea Pictures. And Roderick, you've recorded this work yourself.
I have.
Tell us a little
recorded
about
it and I've sung it with piano several times. I haven't had the opportunity yet to sing it with the orchestra, but I'm sure that will come up soon.
How did you choose to do these? Because they're usually done by mezzos.
Yes, and in fact the project came to me as a recording project along with other orchestral song for baritone. And in singing them, down an octave in my range, so the keys remain the same, nothing has changed except the octave transposition of the vocal part. Nobody in the room, least of all me, felt that there was a mismatch in any way. The poems are not gender specific. 2 of them are by women, 3 of them are by men. The first one speaks a lot about this relationship of mother and child, but it is the sea speaking. It doesn't necessarily need to be a woman. And I feel really happy in the same way that I would urge all the mezzos who are currently throwing their shoes at the television to take those works that have been associated for so long with men and say, why?
It seems to be happening more and more in the 21st century that we're crossing the boundaries, you know. In the old days, my singing teacher, first singing teacher, was a German, and he would have been horrified if I'd said I wanted to sing. He said, you know, this is a man's song and this is a woman's song. But now one becomes the performer, and one can be male or female and draw something out of oneself.
Let's have a listen to some of Elgar's Sea Pictures, performed by a woman, by the mezzo Alice Coote.
The deeps have music soft and low, when winds awake the airy sky. It lures me on to go and see the land where corals lie.
Alice Coote performing Elgar's Sea Pictures there with the Halle under Sir Mark Elder. And Max, you've been inspired so much by the sea in all your writing, all these years you've lived in Orkney. How do you feel that Elgar represented the ocean there?
He does very well. Debussy, who in La Mer, his wonderful portrait of the sea, which he wrote on the south coast of England, not in France, not looking out north, he puts the arithmetic, the mathematics of wave shape in the Fibonacci series, which is a purely arithmetical thing, and he weaves that through his piece, which Elgar, I don't think, would have ever thought about. And I know that living with the sea, as I do all the time, I go out of my door and there is the sea. When you're that close, it's a part of the fabric, not only of your life, inspires you even when you hear it through the open window in the middle of the night, but it almost becomes a part of your body. And I think that Elgar, he's describing sea-related emotions and feelings, but not from that enormous close-up where there is total identification or almost total identification. And I hope I'm not saying something naughty about Elgar when I say that. It's not a criticism, it's just, I think, a statement of his relationship, which is descriptive, and he obviously thoroughly enjoyed it and it meant a lot to him.
And if you enjoyed that prom, you can watch it on the BBC iPlayer. Just go to bbc.co.uk/iPlayer and indulge yourself. Still to come tonight, we have a performance by our guest, Ronnie Williams, and we look at concerts featuring the works of Sir John Tavener and Gustav Mahler. But before that, it was Sir Benjamin Britten who once said, the old idea of a composer suddenly having a terrific idea and sitting up all night to write is nonsense. Nighttime is for sleeping, he said. Well, that was Britten's opinion of a composer, but back in the 60s, for a certain young hotshot, as a composer, it wasn't the ideas that kept him awake, but something else.
What does keep me awake at nights is the method of expression, the technique of composition. This, I think, is the composer's first concern.
So wonderful seeing that piece of footage of you in the 60s, Max. Do you still stay awake at night thinking of method and structure?
Oh yes, all the time. It's absolutely fundamental that you question and research your technique. I think a performer understands that, and I think with a composer, it's no different. You're always reinventing yourself through your technique. I think you take it for granted that you've got something to say, otherwise you've no business being a composer. But you always try to refine and improve. And I still work regular office hours at that desk. It's just a lifetime's habit.
So the opinions there of Max and Sir Benjamin Britten. Well, Proms Extra spent time this week with two contemporary composers at different stages in their careers.
I'm Judith Weir, I'm a composer. I was recently appointed Master of the Queen's Music.
My name is Gavin Higgins, I'm a composer and I live in Brixton. My music is very direct and immediate. It tends to be fast, colourful and rhythmic.
There is quite a sparse clarity to my music. I don't like to stuff too much into a score. I like the feeling that anyone listening can hear everything that's happening at once. That means possibly not having too many instruments playing at the same time. First thing when I sit down and think I can get going now on this new piece is probably to write a very small bit of melody, which might just be 3 notes. But if I've got those 3 notes on paper, I feel so pleased, and I feel at least I've got started. I might just put them down randomly, but there must be a reason for them to be there. I'm thinking very much of the melody as something that will lead me from the beginning to the end. The process of composing is a bit like having something stuck in your head and it won't leave. You become obsessed by certain sounds, possibly for several months, while you try to relate these little bits of tune to each other. So while some people would find that not good to have one of these earworms they can't get rid of, I quite like that feeling that there's a trace of melody in my head that's going round and round. That's the beginning of a piece often.
Whenever I start music, it tends to not start as music. It tends to start as words. So I have all these notebooks, which I just take around with me all the time, and I just write stuff down. I might start sketching rhythmic things, because rhythm is generally a very important part of the music I write. So that might go on for a week or so. And then I just go to a keyboard and start working things out. My first Proms commission was almost exactly a year after the riots that happened in 2012. I was in Brixton when that was going on, and we heard lots of fire engines and police helicopters, and it just felt like the whole country just went mad for 2 days. It was scary that it could turn that quickly. I was really just trying to explore the idea of how something can just explode like that.
There can be a line of thinking that composers are these rarefied creatures who live detached from society, way away from normality. I like to live in the middle of a large city. I try to meet as many different people as possible. I actively dislike the idea of these rarefied composers.
I don't need silence to work, I need quiet. But sounds outside don't really bother me. I live right next to a train line, so they're going by, 7, 8 times an hour.
So we see a lot of the police helicopter around here. I don't mind that too much. It hasn't got a pitch to my way of listening.
The thing that really does bother me, especially around here, is ice cream trucks. I don't know, there's something very insidious about ice cream trucks.
The worst thing in the whole world for me is the ice cream van.
For some reason, it's always outside this house.
It's got the most out-of-tune sound ever. It tries to play a tune.
They keep their tunes on for sort of 30 seconds at a time.
I have to stop often for quite a long time after that's been by.
So, no, noises don't bother me, but ice cream trucks, yeah, they do bother me.
Now, do we have a shared loathing of an ice cream truck on this sofa?
Yes, definitely.
Is that the sort of thing that would distract you, Max?
Of course, where I live now, there are no ice cream vans, and I'm very glad about that. But when I was 14, I think, I wrote to the Swinton and Pendlebury Journal near Manchester, where I lived, complaining about the noise of ice cream vans, which even then I couldn't stand.
From a 14-year-old, that shows dedication to your art.
Yes, yes.
Now then, I think we should ask you, as we've just heard from the new Master of the Queen's Music, Judith Weir, what that role entails, because of course you gave up that position just a year or so ago.
I stopped being MQM just a very short time ago and handed over to Judith, and I'm very pleased that she has taken on the role. She will be absolutely marvellous. I remember when I first went in to see the Queen after I'd accepted the job, I asked her, well, what would you like me to make of this? And she said, well, you can make of it what you like. Philip and I just want to learn, and we shall do everything we can to help. And I thought that was marvellous. And what I did, all those 10 years, it seems like yesterday I started, but what I did was write one or two big pieces, like a big piece for chorus orchestra and brass band and the trumpeters from Kneller Hall and choruses from the cathedrals and chapels royal and whatever else, to mark the anniversary of the end of World War II in 1945, the outbreak of peace. And I invented the Queen's Medal for Music, which has gone to great conductors, great singers, went to Judith Weir, the composer, one year. And I think that is very important. It's somehow raised the profile of serious music of all kinds, just that little bit, and I'm very pleased with that. And I wrote them a Christmas carol for the Chapel Royal every year.
And is that the kind of task that Judith will have as well? Is that now going to be an expectation for her?
She will continue with those things, but I'm sure she will innovate other things which I haven't thought of and do extremely well. I look forward to the results of her work.
Roddy, you compose as well, don't you?
I do. Mostly, of course, as you imagine, vocal music,
yes,
but not exclusively. It's actually, for me, I would count it much more as a hobby, something I can do when I'm on tour with my singing. I'm in a hotel room or in an airport waiting to change another flight, and I can do some work then in those quiet moments. So we can see in that Judith and Gavin there, and you were mentioning as well, you have a 9-to-5 regime, you work at home.
Yes.
I tend to be always on the move.
Yes.
And it's something to keep. Some singers knit, others crochet, and I like to write if I can.
Yeah. And Max, you have written so much. I mean, you are a prolific composer.
Yes.
And you mentioned that you do also keep office hours. But what is a typical day like for you, the composer?
I will get up at home. I will take the dog for a walk, except the dog just died after 12 years, so that's very sad. But I shall still take a walk, whatever the weather. The storm weather there is just so inspiring and vital.
Because you're right up in the Orkneys, aren't you?
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And just to go out and go along the beach. The beach changes all the time. It's never the same twice. And that just gives you lots of, and I think it's a lovely word, old-fashioned word, inspiration and courage to go into the house, have a coffee, face your desk, and I like to be at that desk by 9:30 in the morning, and I will work through with a break for something very light for lunch, and then afterwards at about 6:30, and this might sound ridiculous, and there I am, by myself, and I will set out the table and I will put the water and the 2 wine glasses, and I will, in a very ritualistic kind of way, have a meal. I don't have a television, so I will read, I will listen to music, I will play the piano, I will polish furniture or polish a bit of copper or something, and just relax in that way. And that basically is my day. Of course, at the moment, I'm not at home. I'm away, I think, for 3 weeks, but I'm having a wonderful time being 80 all over the place, having birthday celebrations and getting thoroughly spoiled.
And do you think being a composer is easier these days, or has it changed much from when you started in the 60s?
I think it has. Composers have a hard time of it these days because, for a start, there are so many of them. When I was very young, there were very few of us, and the number of composers here at the Royal College and at the Royal Academy across town is enormous in comparison. And they're all in competition with each other, and then publishers were actively looking for young composers to publish. These days they're overwhelmed, and they're not publishing much anyway, because a lot of them are now run by accountants, not people looking to the future. They're looking to the next 5 minutes worth of profit. So I think they really have a fight.
We've talked a little about the competition between composers these days and how many young composers there are, but do the three of you feel that the audiences are clamouring for new music, for new classical music? What's your sense, Roderick?
That's a tough one, because of course I've spoken to audience members who love the things they know. So I think often, I've had that experience certainly from a performer's eye view on the stage, singing a new work. You look into the eyes of the audience, and as the first chord goes down, you see a sort of look on their faces. But nonetheless, I've also spoken to other audience members who are excited by the prospect of hearing something new. So I don't know, I find it very difficult to speak for them as a whole.
Yeah, I find that the younger generation are really into modern music and they understand it immediately. But I think for older people it can be challenging. My mother used to come to England every year, and I'd take her to all the performances I did, and sometimes she'd just say, "No, that didn't make any sense. It was just too long," you know. She was listening for tunes, and it isn't always the case.
Do you allow yourself, Max, to be swayed by that sense that the audience may not appreciate or understand what you've written?
I think that has happened a lot in my life, that audiences have found what I've done very difficult. I remember in 1969, about a third of them walked out, and it even made the BBC News. There was a scandal at the Albert Hall last night. But I think when you're young, that's something you just have to go through and put up with, and you go on. And the lovely thing is now that that piece and other pieces I wrote then, like 8 songs from Mad King, which caused a great scandal, they're done and done and done, and people enjoy them. And I think that's a very good reason for living until you're 80. Because you see, all those things which cause such problems with audiences, they go full circle, and they're family favourites.
But I think even in the time of Beethoven, you know, when a new work was performed, even Mahler, some of their first performances were very badly received by audiences because it challenged them.
Yes.
And the more we hear music, the more we get to understand the sound world and enjoy it.
Well, if you would like to find out more about new music, you can unlock a whole treasure trove in the New Works collection, which can be found on the BBC iPlayer. I do urge you to go and check that out. Speaking of new music, we're going to turn now to the late Sir John Tavener, whose work Requiem Fragments had its world premiere in the Royal Albert Hall and was shown last week on BBC 4. The world premiere of Requiem Fragments by Sir John Tavener, whose music has become the soundtrack to big emotional national occasions like Princess Diana's funeral. He composed Requiem Fragments shortly before his death. And Patricia, of all of us here, you knew Sir John the best. You worked with him so many times. He wrote for your voice. Tell us a little bit about the man behind that beautiful music.
Well, actually, he put across a very somber image in public and he often looked, he did look very frail towards the end, but knowing him privately, he had a wicked sense of humor, and he was very widely read. He knew, you know, when I first met him, he played Indian classical music to me, and they were like giggling about it, and he said, "This is your music," and he sort of took me back to my roots. But what was wonderful was that I think he, in the first opera of his that I did, Mary of Egypt, he studied my voice, and after that, he wrote many pieces for me. They got harder and harder progressively, but they seemed to fit like a glove after I'd done a bit of work. But the high notes were just there. I just had to think them and they'd be there. It was always difficult, but exciting.
Roddy, you met Sir John, didn't you?
Yes, we did a piece together, Hymn of Dawn, is that right? About
Yes.
2005, 2006, we think. Went to Istanbul and was
right.
also here in London, St John Smith Square. And I remember specifically when Sir John came to rehearsals, I was having a real problem with the style. It was very high line. Yes, it was Arabic.
Yes,
it was very high line for me, and I couldn't. I was in sort of octaves with your part, or with tenths or something. I couldn't get it. And eventually, he was just sitting way back in the stall somewhere. He said, "No, Roddy, like this." to this extraordinary thing. And I thought, do you know what?
It made sense,
That's
didn't
it. Yes, I was trying to sing it. That was my problem.
Now, Max, does Sir John Taverner's work speak to you?
I like some of the shorter pieces very much. The longer ones, I'm afraid it's a bit like going to Parsifal. I don't take to them so kindly.
I take
but
it that's not a compliment in your world.
I do recognise that he's a great composer, and that he has one thing which can be an example to us. He makes one note, two notes work very, very hard over time and in space. And that economy produces an intensity of spiritual awareness between perhaps just two notes, which is quite extraordinary. I have difficulty with some of his work, but enormous respect, and some of the smaller pieces I really do like. He was a wonderful choral writer, particularly.
And do you know if he enjoyed your work?
He didn't like my work at all.
Really?
No. I remember being quite abusive in public, saying that, some of my work, it was like laundering dirty linen in public. And I didn't mind. Fine, he didn't like Beethoven either. But you just accept that, and not that I'm a Beethoven, I would never claim to be. You just think, oh yes, well, I can learn from John certain things about concentration and spirituality, but other things I will just leave aside when he starts talking about me and my work.
It seems to me that a thick skin is a requirement of being a composer.
I think you have to have both a thick skin and a very sensitive one.
Well, it is time for our weekly feature that we know strikes a chord, with many of you. Yes, it is David Owen Norris and his chord of the week.
This week's chord is from Sir John Taverner's Requiem Fragments. It's D major and B major simultaneously. And I think it came into Taverner's mind when he was thinking about the resonant buildings in which his piece might be performed, so it's right at home in the Royal Albert Hall. Now, a generous acoustic can make chords overlap, and Taverner's taken that idea and run with it. He's writing for double choir, and he has one choir sing what we call a cycle of fifths, chords 5 notes apart, D major, down 5 notes to G, down to C, and F, while his other choir fills in that cycle of fifths with chords 3 notes apart. So when Taverner puts those together, he gets overlapping, echoing chords. And then he gets a completely different set of overlapping echoes by singing everything backwards. To put it in the context of contemporary art, you might say he's cut up his shark a different way.
David Owen Norris and his chords will be back next week. Now, from revolutions to sacred words to tragedy, or at least a symphony nicknamed the Tragic, but officially known as the Sixth Symphony, composed by Gustav Mahler. Conducted by Valery Gergiev, here is the World Orchestra for Peace performing Mahler's Symphony No. 6. Mahler's Sixth Symphony performed by the World Orchestra for Peace and conducted by Valery Gergiev. And Max, can you feel the tragedy in that music?
It's very tragic, and the ending of the Sixth Symphony of Mahler must be one of the most despairing noises that music has ever made, where he quite literally takes a big hammer and smashes it onto the platform. Oh, it's a terrifying gesture. And I think that music, it is a foretaste, if you like, of the extreme agonies that he was going to go through mentally, spiritually, a little later in his life. And the very fact that he wrote it with all its self-questioning and agonizing and despair, what an act of courage, what an example that is for all of us. And I think we can all have, to use a lovely old-fashioned word, uplift from his example there. And I think it's an absolutely marvellous piece, wonderful piece, one of my top favourites.
I think that one of the things which impresses me about hearing a well-known piece like that is to hear it performed by so many different orchestras, as we have that luxury here at the Proms. And the World Orchestra for Peace are a very particular group, aren't they? Yes. Brought together, hand-picked, superb musicians who play in other orchestras around the world. And there's a real sort of mission started by Sir George Solti to sort of show how musicians can work together from all different cultural backgrounds. And I know this is something that you feel very strongly about, Patricia, with the work you do in India as well.
Absolutely. I think that music is a force that, you know, opens people up and it gives them confidence. I've been teaching in India for the last 5 years, and I've been amazed by young people coming to me from all parts of India wanting to... I do the singing, so I teach singing, and they're just lapping it up. And I've been discovering some really beautiful voices, which is very exciting.
And Max, I know this is a cause very close to your heart, this idea of music breaking down boundaries, crossing social divide.
That has put an end to that orchestra. And all you can do is try to overcome and make music the healing power that it really is, given half a chance. And the orchestra there, we saw, well, it's a marvellous gesture in the right direction. There must be more, there must be more.
Well, I think it's going to be a huge buzz when Daniel Barenboim comes into town with his orchestra there, more than anything else. So I'm intrigued to see what happens there.
Yes, the West Eastern Divan, they're going to be promming in the next couple of weeks, so we shall look out for that. Well, it's good to see classical music doing all it can to bring everyone together, but sadly, Proms Extra is about to break up this particular party as we are almost at the end of tonight's show. But we have a little treat for you, because on BBC4 tomorrow night, there is one heck of a singing, swinging battle in the Royal Albert Hall. There is nothing else worth watching, because it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing.
It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. Do-what, 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 do-what. It don't mean a thing, all you gotta do is swing. Do-what, 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 do-what.
No difference if it's sweet or hot. Just give the rhythm everything you got.
Don't need a thing if it ain't got that swing.
An exciting concert not to be missed tomorrow night on BBC4 at 7. Do join me. And the host of that concert, Claire Teal, will be joining me on next week's Proms Extra, along with the king of dad dancing and conductor of the Bodusan Istanbul Phil, Sasha Gertzel, and another bad boy of British composers, Mark Anthony Turnage. Well, just time to remind you that you can watch Proms every Thursday, Friday and Sunday on BBC4. Radio 3 broadcasts every prom live, and you can find this episode of Proms Extra on the BBC iPlayer. That is it, though, for Proms Extra for tonight. Many thanks to my guests, to Patricia Rosario, to Max, aka Sir Peter Maxwell Davis, and my thanks to Roderick Williams, who has taken his place behind me. Accompanied by Susie Allen on the piano, here is Roderick Williams singing his own arrangement of Amazing Grace. Goodbye.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my heart relieved. How precious did that grace appear, the